Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leading in a New Reality, a webinar series produced by Lead San Diego in partnership with Jones. I'm Elizabeth Fitzsimons, Vice President of Leadership and Engagement at LEAD, an affiliate of the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. At LEAD San Diego, it's our mission to connect, educate, and empower leaders for positive change. And we do that through professional and leadership development, board matching, and partnering with local nonprofits on projects that serve the community. This series is produced in partnership with Jones, a company whose mission is to develop leaders and human systems that counter oppression through diversity, inclusion, and organizational effectiveness. This webinar is meant to help you understand what's happening in our ever-changing world, and also to inspire you and empower you as leaders of teams and leaders of families. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed by our friends at ABC 10 News. If you would, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send us questions for our panelists, and we'll also take questions from our viewers on Facebook as well. My colleague and program manager, Kim Nguyen, is here with me, and we'll be looking for your questions and comments, and we hope to get to as many as possible today. Today's topic is voting. It's a super timely topic if you've been paying attention to the news and the conventions. There is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions, and also a lot of misinformation out there. And today we have three experts with us who will help us understand what it takes to ensure a safe and secure election where everyone's voice is heard. The word unprecedented has been used a lot during the last few months, and it's true here too. This election is unprecedented. It's taking place during a pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. This week, of course, we have protests in Wisconsin over the police shooting of yet another unarmed Black man, Jacob Blake, and that was followed by a young white man shooting at protesters and killing two of them. So, that is part of this discussion today too. How will the unified cries for an end to systemic racism in our country play out this year at the polls? Today, we're going to break things down for you, and we hope you'll leave today's program with a deeper understanding of the issues around voting this year, and also ideas for action that you can take. My thanks to our guests for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce them to you now. Layla Aziz is the Director of Operations with Pillars of the Community. Pillars of the Community is committed to embracing and celebrating the rich, historic, and diverse culture of Southeast San Diego. It strives to counter the criminalization of the community through community organizing, leadership development, and strategic partnerships. Pillars' civic engagement focus is on low-propensity voters in Southeast San Diego. They do this through phone banking, door knocking, canvassing, and jail inreach. Layla also serves on the board of directors for the Jacobs Center for Neighborhood Innovation. Welcome, Layla Aziz.
Thank you for having me.
Griselda Ramirez is Director of Civic Engagement at Mid-City CAN in City Heights. CAN stands for Community Advocacy Network. Mid-City CAN is comprised of residents of the Mid-City neighborhood who care about making a lasting impact in this community. Mid-City CAN helps organize teams of residents to create a safe, productive, and healthy community through collaboration, advocacy, and organizing. Since joining the organization in 2015, Griselda has organized community members for transportation justice and helped build a successful grassroots civic engagement program. She is also an alumna of our LEAD Advanced program for women. Welcome, Griselda.
So excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Michael Vu is the director of the San Diego County Registrar of Voters. As registrar, Michael is responsible for election administration of one of the largest election jurisdictions in the country, with a registered voter population of nearly 1.8 million. He oversees all primary, general, special, and district elections for the county, as well as elections for the surrounding municipalities. In a career that has taken him from Salt Lake City to Ohio to San Diego, Michael has worked to improve the elections process and has been involved on both a national and local level to discuss the status of election administration. Welcome, Michael Vu.
Such a pleasure being here.
Thank you all for being with us today. Michael, let's start with you, please. If you could just kind of give us a lay of the land. What is the focus of the Registrar of Voters office right now?
Well, let me just say a couple of things. It's such a pleasure being here and being able to be part of this great panelist of a group of speakers that I have met in a variety of different capacities that are out there. But let me also say that happy E-68 as well in terms of an administrator's lingo is that we're 68 days from the election. And not are we only just 68 days away from the election, but we're 39 days away from sending every single registered voter in our county a mail ballot. So when we talk about the upcoming election, what are we preparing for? Well, how do we conduct one of the largest elections that we conduct in a 4-year cycle, a presidential general election, at a time during during a pandemic, within one of the largest elections jurisdictions in the country? And for our office, there are some major changes that are happening as a result of the pandemic that everyone needs to know about. And that is where the Registrar of Voters office is one of the main missions and concerns that is out there is to ensure that there are no surprises for our registered voters, that they know all of the changes that are happening in this upcoming election, the fact that every single registered voter is going to be receiving a mail ballot, and then what are the options when it comes down to respective polling places. Will there be polling places? The answer to that question is yes. There'll be fewer of them, but much larger locations across a 4-day period as opposed to what voters are accustomed to. But as you had mentioned, Elizabeth, is that we've been upended in all of our world when it comes down to this pandemic, and certainly this also relates to elections as well.
Michael, what are your expectations as far as how many of those folks will go to the polling places and how many will vote by mail?
Well, if you looked at the elections across the last 4 presidential general elections, we've had a 79.5% average turnout in our county. When you're thinking us as being one of the largest election jurisdictions in the country, and we show and demonstrate that we are out there voting and are very engaged at that average of 79.5%. You know that we are highly engaged and civic minded in our community, even though we are such a large jurisdiction across the entire country. When we look at the overall total number of individuals, though, that are voting by mail versus at the polls, what we're seeing is that nearly 70% of all votes cast in elections are by mail. Our community prefers voting by mail. Right now, we're at 76.5% that are signed up to be a permanent mail ballot voter. Now, that shouldn't discount the 23.5% that still goes to the poll or must need to go to the polls because they haven't signed up. But the mere fact is that we have a preference of here and a rich history of voting by mail. So as we anticipate the upcoming election, and you kind of use those respective figures that we've been kind of making some assumptions on, and it's anyone's going to be best guess at how many people are going to vote their mail ballot when they receive it versus going to ultimately to the polls. But as we have planned it out, we're thinking around 300 to 350,000 individuals will still go to the polls. And if we think about a 79.5% turnout, that represents about 1.4 million people will vote entirely, representing about 1.1 that will vote their mail ballot. So it's going to be a big election, any way you cut it. The question will be, will we actually beat the percentage turnout of the 84% that we saw during the 2008 presidential general election, which was the first Obama election?
Right. Michael, could you go back? You said that the polling places would be larger. So I take that it means more spread out, right? To allow for physical distancing, and that they would be open longer. Does that mean for a few days rather than just one day?
Yes, so those that are watching this we're all accustomed to having around our neighborhood polling places, our neighborhood garage or the business down the street, our pizza parlor to go to, because that's where our polling place is to go and vote. Because of the pandemic, we're actually consolidating all those smaller locations because they're just simply too small for physical distancing. Plus, as we saw from my colleagues across the entire country that had to conduct a presidential primary or a primary election under the cloud of a pandemic, what we saw was some of these private entities that was graciously offering their place as a polling location, to say ultimately end up changing it to say no because of liability purposes, because of social distancing to being too small. So those were learning lessons that we didn't have to go through and that we didn't have to grapple through because we had an early March election. And so for us was, how do we create certainty? How do we create certainty where we're going to be able to use much larger facilities, but ones that will make themselves available for certain? And so we're looking at public facilities. So when we're looking at consolidating what we were anticipating as to having 1,600 neighborhood polling places, we're consolidating those down to 235, what we're calling super poll sites that are no less than 2,000 square feet in space to allow for physical distancing, to ensure that there are not your normal 4 board members, poll workers that are going to be serving at these respective locations, but upwards of 15 poll workers that will be there. And then much more equipment and technology that we're expanding on to serve the public, to ensure that the flow is not going to create an overcrowding of voters should they go to their assigned polling place. So as you mentioned, we have 4 days as opposed to 1 day, these 235 sets. And so this is the trade-off, as opposed to the 1,600 precincts that we will have on election day for a 13-hour period. We'll have 235 locations running for a 4-day period across the entire county. So October 31st through November 3rd.
And that's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, right?
That's correct. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So October 31st, Halloween, all the way through the close of polls at 8 p.m. on November 3rd.
That's great. Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it. And we're going to poll our attendees. Kim's going to launch a poll. We want to get an idea of those attending right now. Are you registered to vote? And while we're putting up that poll, I'm going to ask Michael, what is the percentage of people registered to vote compared to those who are eligible to vote in San Diego County? Do you have any idea on that?
We are at 83% of all individuals that are eligible to register are registered within our county. So what that equates to in terms of raw numbers is there are approximately 2.2 million eligible individuals that can register to vote, and we're at 1.84 million. It keeps on toggling because there's a number of people that are registering to vote as we speak, and we know that individuals are highly engaged for this upcoming election.
How does that compare to other jurisdictions around the country? I mean, if you could kind of give us a little context of where we fit in.
What I would say is that we're above average across the entire country, and I think we're average when it comes down to the state. There have been a number of policy decisions by the legislature, as well as, of course, by the governor when he signs off on it, to really open the door to registering to vote. You have online voter registration, where you can register frankly, by simply going to our website at sdvote.com, go through 5 screens. That takes about 2 minutes to register to vote. You don't have to no longer get a paper registration form from our office or at your city clerks or the libraries or the U.S. Postal Service. You can just simply go online, go to your mobile phone. So that has opened the opportunity for individuals to register and vote. And so we've only seen a higher number of people registering to vote over the last number of years.
Great. Kim just shared the results of that poll, and we have 100% say yes, that they are registered to vote. So that is, we will not be giving that homework today when we leave, right? To go register. So we're good there. Check mark. A question for Leila and Griselda. The expanded days and the new polling places, how does that, what is your response to that? And how do we ensure that everyone in the community has access to voting? What is the most important thing right now? Leila, would you like to start with this one?
First thing is ensuring that everyone who is eligible to vote, that we're touching them. And we're reaching them and looking at places where we do have that small percentage of people who have not registered to vote. Where are these individuals and how do we get to them? Mm-hmm. And that's something that Mid-City Kent and Pillars does. We work on getting low propensity voters, and we work on what we call Obama voters at Pillars, getting them back to the polls. And when we look at the data and we see these people have only voted once in their life, and that was in 2008, many not even in 2012, how do we engage them into this process? And so that's the first step, is going to be registering everyone who is eligible to vote to vote.
Mm-hmm. Griselda?
I definitely agree with Layla with what she said. We have to make sure that people are registered to vote, and the people that are eligible to vote and they have their correct addresses too, because a lot although the ballots are coming to their home, so we have to make sure that no one misses that, right? That when that ballot comes to their home, they have it. So what's really important right now is having that open communication with our community, with our residents, so that they're informed that their ballots are coming, especially because some folks, they don't know. They're hearing a lot of things on TV, right? I've had residents call me and tell me, hey, so do I pick up my ballot at the post office? And they've been actively voting, but since this year has shifted a lot of things, has changed a lot of things, these are real concerns that the folks in our communities are having. So we need to make sure that we are educating them, that we're letting them know, that we're keeping them informed, and that there's open communication, so that they're not here. There's a lot of like hearsay and thearsay, and so that they have the correct information in their hands.
Thank you. Michael, what is the registrar's office doing to reach those who are eligible but not registered?
Elizabeth, thank you for that. For our office, let me just say a couple of things. This was never in the cards. Of course, the only reason why there are so many changes going into this upcoming election is as a result of the pandemic. For us, something of the changes that we're seeing normally takes 4 to 6, maybe even 8 to 10 years to make that shift. You just don't turn the Titanic on a dime like what we're doing. We've been contemplating and preparing for this upcoming election 4 years ago when we finished up the 2016 presidential general election. So having the pandemic has now required us to turn this Titanic on a dime in 4 to 6 months, if that, in terms of our preparations and our planning. So when you make this respective change, as I said before, the change is not necessarily internal. Yeah, there are a lot of changes happening inside our organization right now as we're preparing for the election. But really the change is making sure that voters out there are not surprised. And so for me, my main message is to get the word out to every single registered voter, to every single individual that is eligible, to make sure that they are aware of what these respective changes are. So we've launched into the largest campaign in the history of our county, as in the history of our office, and that started off with our county-wide mailer, where we send every single registered voter in our county a mailer to give them a primer of what those changes are. The fact that every single registered voter is going to get a mail ballot in this election for our county. The fact that there will be fewer locations in this upcoming election than there has been in the past, and that those locations will be open 4 times as long in terms of the upcoming election, that their locations that they're normally used to going to has changed. But I think one component that Griselda talked about is informing them of what we have on file for them. So this countywide mailer that we had listed their residence address as well as their mailing address, what we had on file for this individual, and have them verify that information. And if it was different, to have them act by re-registering to vote. As we talked about this, 83% of all eligible voters are registered to vote in our county. I think the main message for us is let's make sure that we have the correct information on file for you so that there is no delay in you receiving your mail ballot. Now, starting the end of this week and into the remaining days that we have, we'll be doing more social media pushes, more TV, radio, newspaper ads. And I'm not just talking about the more traditional media, but also the local networks that we have out there. I've done my series of presentations to the communities across all the various stakeholders that we're aware of, and adding other presentations, as we know of other organizations that want this information. And so we have had nonstop work. We have not really rested since the preparing and finishing up the March election. to really get ready and conduct a well-run election for November.
Great, thank you, Michael. Layla, when you're reaching out to the folks who are eligible to vote, but who aren't yet registered, what is generally the reasons that you're finding that they're not registered, and what comes up in those conversations that you're having?
One of the biggest reasons is felony disenfranchisement and unclearness on who is eligible to vote. So many times in the community, people will say, oh, I went to prison, I went to jail, I can't vote, which is not true. And so there's voter education around enfranchisement and voting, and we hear that a lot. Some people, they don't believe in voting. They don't think that they have a stake or they can change things. And many times that's another level of education on people see candidates a lot of times, they don't see the issues, and sometimes just educating people on the issues and the different things that are at stake, that helps engage them into the process. But confusion, I would say, is the #1 reason why folks in my community are not registered to vote.
Are you seeing the same thing, Griselda? Why they aren't registered?
Very similar. So I would definitely say confusion, lack of education, on lack of education in the voting system, and trust. Our communities have been disenfranchised for so long that they don't trust government, and especially like in City Heights. I will talk about City Heights because I consider City Heights the melting pot, right? We have folks from everywhere, different languages, different dialects. A lot of things are not in language for them, and also in their countries, in their home countries, voting could have like cost them their life. So coming to another country where we're telling them to go vote, but in their home country they couldn't. So there's this confusion of like, if I do it, am I in trouble? And so just a lot of education around why it matters to your day-to-day life. And like Layla said, they do just see the candidate. They're not seeing the issues, their day-to-day life, that pothole that is outside, the safety in their streets. And that's what we at Mid-City Can, we tell them, vote for your community, vote for your day-to-day life, and educating them on like how these systems work. So we've been doing that for the past 4 years, and we're still doing it, and we're just making sure that there's the piece of trust and education there, because like I said, candidates come in, they say vote for me, and then they leave, but the community-based organizations were there, right? And we've been building trust throughout these 4 years.
And how do you persuade someone who feels very strongly that their vote doesn't matter, and that that they can't make a difference with their vote? What is your response to that? And I want to hear Layla's as well.
So I'll talk a little bit about in 2016. This happened a lot where folks voted, and we're completely nonpartisan. Let me just put that out there. They voted for a candidate, and then something else happened, right? And they're like, well, I voted and my vote didn't count because this person is elected, and this and that. But then we turned it around to like, look at all the local wins that we had, right? We were able to shift this, and this is what your vote did for this community. You were able to elect, a woman of color, and like the City Heights community turned out at a higher rate that year, I remember. And so just talking about that, and like the impact that seems so small, but at the end of the day is so big for our communities, just reminding them of that, that you were able, in your community, your district was able to choose who was going to represent you at a local level, and just keeping that conversation alive. That's the best that we can do.
Layla, tell us about those conversations you have, the trust conversations.
And like Griselda said, we don't leave. So there's not election time, and then we do speeches, and then we leave, and no one sees us for another 2 years or 4 years, depending on that
Right.
cycle. But real life, real tangible lessons and situations where people can understand them. First of all, if there's a trust and is my vote going to be counted, there's a way to see if your vote has been counted on the San Diego Register of Voters site. So you can see after you mail in your mail-in ballot or you vote that it was counted. And that's an important thing. So we educate people on how you can check something like that. And I'll bring up mine so that they can see it, something of that nature. Just letting people, giving them basic information. They're like, oh, okay, I can check. Another thing is looking at in Southeastern San Diego, our District 4 race and letting people know, remember during the primaries, there was one vote that the councilwoman now for District 4 won by. And that one vote could have been you. And that makes people understand that one vote. And other things, Prop 47, letting people in the community know, because we have so many people that have had some kind of criminal justice involvement. And now you're not going to prison because you're hungry and you stole a bag of chips. That was a vote that we did with Prop 47. And now people who are hungry can actually go get food and not prison, and exacerbating the problem and letting people see those things and they go, oh, wow, cash bail is this year. So that's going to be a big one. Are we going to pay 10% to bail bondsmen and lose that money? Or are we going to end cash bail as we know it? Those are things that are tangible to people. Education. So you meet people where they are. You understand the issues. And you're basically letting them know. And you're not saying what's good and what's bad. Some people might want cash bail. Some people don't. But you're allowing them to understand exactly what's at stake.
And you had mentioned when we talked earlier this week that really the focus for you and your team is on local. It's really what's happening locally. I mean, people, that's what's going to move people to go to the polls, right? It's not the state or the national election.
You have to understand your market. And my market is Black voters. Period. That's my specialty. And then other voters that have criminal justice issues, right? Mm-hmm. So if I understand my market, I know that I have to do stop tests to see, are my people going to go out and vote for president this year? In Obama, yes, that's all we had to sell. Obama, right? But this year, there's a concentrated effort on the different parties. One party is putting millions and millions of dollars into stopping Black folks in swing states from voting. And the other one is putting millions and millions to get them to vote because they know the numbers and where Trump won, and it's going to be Black voters in swing states. So what we're seeing now is it's working. People are saying, you know, I'm not voting. I don't like either one of these guys. And that in itself is dangerous for me. And so that's when we have to withdraw, and we have to really speak to local issues. People aren't going to like the president every time. People don't even understand these U.S. representatives. They don't mean much to them, but they do understand, like Griselda said, the potholes. They do understand basic policing. And this year for the city of San Diego, we're looking at an independent police review board. Those are the educational items that we can then talk to our people about and get them excited about making a change and letting them know one vote. We could lose this by one vote. All we need you to do is do your part, or win. Just do your part.
Can you say a little bit more, Layla, I know about voter suppression, you know, what that means historically and now where we're seeing it in the country, and just we've read so much about that. Can you explain a little bit of that from a historical perspective?
Well, this country, if you look at the trend in this country, from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration, you're going to see the same voting trend in that. You're going to see from slavery, could not vote. You're going to see the electoral system that we have now, the 3/5 of a man on how they count us, to going through disenfranchisement and Jim Crow laws, to now felony convictions and other things stopping you from being able to vote. It's the same system. So all of this disenfranchisement from a person being in bondage for certain laws to a person not being able to vote, it's all done through the criminal justice system now. And we understand that, and that's what we're dealing with. So we do a lot of, and that's how I've dealt with Michael Fu. He's seen me do some of the best bad acting that a person could do on the sheriff. I know I tickled him pink, but it's a fight. And I'm willing to fight for voter enfranchisement because that's in my blood. That is one of the stakes of being the hopes and the dreams of a slave is. So I'm willing to take that fight on at any time with anybody. And one of our biggest disenfranchisement pieces, and the registrar of voters has done everything they can do to get those ballots in those jails, is the fact that the sheriff does not want to allow a huge voter significance in the jails for some reason. And because the sheriff is an elected official, I would guess that might kind of lean towards why. But all I know, I don't want to see through the politics. All I know is that with the restoring of the Voter Rights Act that Representative John Lewis was trying to do. When you have a low propensity of people registered in an entity, the feds need to come in and overlook it to make sure people are not being disenfranchised. And that's what we're seeing. So we have thousands of people, 60, 70,000 people in the state of California who are systemically disenfranchised simply because they're in a county jail and they have the right by law to vote.
Michael, how are folks in the jails voting?
Well, we're working certainly with the sheriff's office as well as his personnel to ensure individuals can not just vote, but also register to vote if they are not of course, an incarcerated felon. And of course, there is specific differentiations between a person that can register versus a person that cannot register, depending on their status. But a person that is in jail, we're working closely with the staff there over at the sheriff's office. And we're operating, as Layla discussed, as kind of a conduit to the ability to get them registered, those individuals that are in a jail to register, and then also the opportunity to get them a ballot in their hands as well, and then getting it returned back to us in a timely fashion so that we can count it.
Great. And how are you ensuring too that communities of color that there is equitable access to the polling places? And we also just had a question from one of our audience members about that. Where these polling places are sited throughout the county is really important in terms of access.
So let me just say a couple of things. Is the fact that we are under federal law supposed to uphold to the Federal Voting Rights Act. And so for one is there are specific thresholds that have been met in our county when we talk about our 1.84 million registered voters. A segment of that population that we are required to provide election materials in includes Spanish, Filipino, Vietnamese, and Chinese, as well as providing services within the Sycuan reservation as well, because we have been covered under the Department of Justice as well as the Voting Rights Act based off of providing information and election material for those respective. But know that our outreach doesn't just stop there. Our outreach is really to the entire community because we have specific folks that are hired to do outreach to all various communities that are out there, particularly in targeted communities. What we haven't talked about, that I haven't talked about as well, is that we have state-covered languages, Laotian, Korean, Japanese, and Arabic that we also have to provide specific services for in specific areas of the county. We have probably one of the most robust language programs in the country. I would say that we are second to none in terms of it, and I believe I can say that since I have been working in other parts of the parts of the country, as well as I know what my colleagues are doing in other parts of the country as well as in other parts of the state. So I would uphold our language program to anyone out there. But let me also talk about the siting of these 235 sites, because again, we are consolidating much more heavily. Again, part of the reasons why we chose public facilities and focused our attentions on public facilities is because they are strategically located. Most of these are schools that we're exactly. So they're open for students. Some of them are open for students, and I know that the school districts are making their decisions on a case-by-case basis based off what's best for their district. But know that we've been working with all of the superintendents throughout the entire county to identify where the best locations are that we could use as schools. And they've been gracious to allow us to use specific schools that we've identified. And then we also have other locations that we are using. Again, recreation centers, community centers. We're looking at socioeconomic as well as transportation corridors, population density. And we just talk about accessibility too. When I talk about accessibility, I'm not just talking about in terms of people with disabilities, even though that is a requirement and something that we have to factor in terms of our considerations. But the fact that we also have urban versus rural, unincorporated versus city, there are a lot of factors that we have to consider when we're thinking about the siting of these respective locations. And then, as I mentioned before, is we have to consider our own administrative structure about how many contests are going to be on the ballot. People don't realize this, voters don't realize this, because they get one type of ballot for their respective place, their residence. But no, in this upcoming elections, there are over 840 different variations of the ballot in this upcoming election. And then you have to multiply that by 5 because we support 5 languages throughout the entire county. And so as you can tell, with these 5 languages, English, Spanish, Filipino, Vietnamese, and Chinese, are effectively running in parallel with one another as we try to conduct and prepare for this upcoming election. So if you go to our website, it's all there and also translated in all these respective languages as well. But I would say by far is our ability to have and touch directly the various community-based organizations that our folks are out to, as well as I'm out there, and more commonly now through chats like these or meetings like these through Zooms, to get really the information in their respective language, or to get information that is just basic for us, but is fundamental for a person to exercise their right to vote.
You have quite an operation going on there, Michael. Thank you for making time for us today. I appreciate it. Griselda, let's talk about the impact of COVID. It has disproportionately affected people in the Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities. I'm just curious, how do you see that affecting voter turnout in these communities?
Well, COVID-19 has brought a lot of light to, an economic crisis, right? And how our communities are suffering. And so I think for me, the way that I see it, it could go 2 ways, right? We're seeing that our communities are being affected, and they're worried about their day-to-day life. So they're worried about how to make ends meet, how to deal with the shift with their children in schools, so that voting right now might be at the back of their mind, right? And they're not really that's not their priority right now. Their priority right now is how to move forward, how to stabilize their house, how to pay their rents. And also, just seeing how, and then some of them might be angry because we're seeing how the healthcare system has failed our communities, right? And so by seeing that, there's anger with the current elected officials and how they represent them. So like I said, it could go 2 ways. Either it's going to light the fire to elect and choose new people, right, to represent them, because they're seeing the disparities that are happening within these communities, right, to their day-to-day life. Or it could just be like, you know what, it doesn't matter, whoever I vote for, this is what's going to happen, and they might not vote. So the goal here is to see this is happening, and this is why who represents you matter. This is why this matters, right? The person that's representing you is going to matter when things like this happen. And so for their schools, for their health, and so that's the way I see it. I'm hoping that everybody turns out and elects a new person, or they're the deciding factor on who's going to represent them. However, it's really hard right now because our communities are suffering. They're struggling, and they're trying to make ends meet. They're trying to figure out what's going to happen with the moratoriums finish when they're done, and how unemployment, right? If they're not an essential worker, they're worried about where are they going, where to work. That's the question. It's my job. Call me. And so voting right now, they're seeing it. It's on TV. It's everywhere. But that's not their priority. And we understand that is not the priority of our communities right now. And so I know that organizations like Midtown Pillars, we are talking to folks about why it is important to turn out to vote. And then also, if going out to vote might endanger their lives, and then they are an essential worker, there's a lot of questions up in the air, out and vote, even though they're getting mail-in ballots. But let's be real, a lot of people in our community rather go to the polls. Whether we are educating them on your vote was counted, they want to go to the polls. And what so then there's a whole, what if I get sick and then I get my family sick? There's just a lot. I want to say people are turning, but the reality is that our communities are suffering. So,
Layla, it looks like you're in agreement on that.
Totally. And we're also seeing, because voting and being C3 and registering people to vote, we can take position on certain propositions, right? Not candidates. But another thing that voting, it makes it hard is within our communities, we're first responders, Mid-City Can, Pillars. During COVID, we fed people. We sent groceries to people. We help people get to testing. With voting and registering to vote, you can't give to get, right? So we were able to leverage a lot of, because we shut down. So we were able to leverage some of that census money and different things in order to give right directly back to the community. In voting, you can't do that. That's against the law. So shutting that down too, as we kind of build up on voter engagement and voter registration, it's almost like we're going to be saying, you know, we can't help you anymore because you can't. And so that's another strategic thing that we're looking at. We know how to do it. We always do it, but it's never during a pandemic. And so that's going to be hard too. We can pick up ballots. We can have people designate us as the people, but you have to be a volunteer. You can't get paid to do that. We have an issue, and I can say that I am one of those people because I wasn't always a high propensity voter. I didn't see the point for many years, and I would get a mail-in ballot. Somebody told me to do that, and I would lose it. And a lot of people in our community do. It comes with the mail and the mailers, and we talked about that a little bit, and next thing you know, it's in the trash. But then when you go to the ballot, the polling place, you're given a provisional ballot because they can't count your vote twice. And I can say a person who has thrown away that ballot many times, Michael Vu never counted my vote twice. Every time I did a provisional and they checked to see if I voted before that vote was counted. So I have personally, just dealing with our registrar, I have faith and I know that this is a well-oiled machine. Mm-hmm. I can say that where other registrar voters in other counties have rushed things to get propositions and have not really certified signatures and everything, that scared me a little bit because I'm like, oh, you check it? Michael Vu has not done anything. His thing is always looking at the quality and making sure that each vote is counted and it's a real legitimate vote. So I'm not worried about that part coming from San Diego, but I am worried about us making the paradigm shift quick enough to pick up all of these people and have a higher turnout, because we can use this to our advantage. This is also, it's not just a threat, it's an opportunity, because people are home and they're listening and we have their ear to do something that we've never done before. And that's get back to what we've done once before, get back those Obama voters from 2008.
That's great. Thank you, Layla. Michael, we have a question for you from our audience. It says, mail ballots are subject to signature comparison, which can be highly subjective. In March 2020, over 100,000 mail ballots were rejected in California and 550,000 in all the primaries. How can a mail voter ensure that his or her ballot is accepted and counted?
There's a number of ways, Elizabeth. Here is a number of the mail ballots that we receive is because it's not timely cast, not because of the signature. In fact, the legislature has moved to create a law that allows a person to cure their signature if it's deemed to mismatch when we compare it and verify it against the signature on file. So if we find a situation where we have got to the point where we cannot count the ballot because the signature just doesn't compare, which may go through 5 iterations and escalations, by the way. It's just not going to fail on a first review of it, but multiple escalations of review before we get to that point. We are required to notify that voter that they have the ability to cure their signature. Or in situations where they did not even sign the back of their envelope, to be able to cure it and provide us their signature. But let me get to the heart of the timeliness of the mail ballots, because I think it also touches upon the U.S. Postal Service. And let me just say, I have all confidence in the U.S. Postal Service. What you're hearing and what the audience may hear about when it comes down to the U.S. Postal Service on a national scale and the concerns about the viability or the timeliness of returning mail ballots back to our office is simply just not the case of what we're seeing here at the Registrar of Voters office. We have a close working relationship with our U.S. local U.S. Postal Service representatives. And they have given me all assurances that they are going to be able to meet the capacity, whether that's the outbound of the mail ballots getting to them or the inbound as they voted it and got it back to our office. But what we're advising voters is the same thing that we've always advised voters. Make sure if you're going to return that mail ballot through the U.S. Postal Service to vote it and get it back to our office 7 days in advance of Election Day. So that's number one. But also, let me just say, is that if there's any concerns, the legislature has also stepped in. The legislature has said, if so long as that ballot is postmarked on election day and is received 17 days after election day, it's a timely cast ballot. That's 14 additional days than what the previous law was. The previous law was it had to be postmarked on election day and received within 3 days. Now, let me just say, my experience with the mail and mail ballots is the majority of all mail ballots gets to us by that 3rd day. So I don't necessarily feel like there's going to be too many more ballots that's going to come post the 3rd day. That is postmarked on election day. That's going to come somehow afterwards. We will ultimately see though, but there is again an additional 14 days safety net for those ballots to get back to our office. But again, I want to say the operative term here, it has to be postmarked by election day.
Postmarked by election day. Okay, that's good to know. And while you were mentioning the post office, Michael, I remembered that the post office recently, they have really been, their Twitter game has been on point recently. And I just looked at my phone to find this to you all. I wanted to read it. It was a tweet from earlier this week, and it said, if all Americans vote by mail this year, 330 million ballots over the course of the election would be only 75% of what we deliver in one single day. So that was a pretty confident tweet from the Postal Service. So should allay everybody's fears for a little bit, right? Let's see, we have a couple more questions here. Here's one that I'll direct towards Layla. How can we help fight against voter suppression, disenfranchisement, particularly in the Black community?
Well, one of the things that we're actively fighting is when I talked about the felony disenfranchisement, and to show how substantial it was, not in California, but in Florida, 1.5 million people were disenfranchised from ever voting again for life. And these people were in their community, they were paying taxes, they were parents. And out of that 1.5 million, it touched every level, where 2,600 of these people could never vote again for the rest of their life for driving without a license. And so they did some work to get that back. And they had a vote. And so now people, about 1.3 of that 1.5 million can now vote. But then another obstacle is placed, in the Senate or the legislature in Florida voted that, and the governor, that these people had to completely pay all of their fines, which we look at as being a poll tax almost before they could vote. So not only did they get the right to vote, all of a sudden it was snatched back for a lot of people. So looking at those kind of disenfranchisement places and who really just, it's a blanket. Virginia was like that until they saw someone was going to win, and all of a sudden the governor let 400,000 people vote. He was actually sued and couldn't do that though. That was in 2016. So really looking at these things and being ahead of the curve. So in California, we're able to now, we're going to vote on a proposition that's going to allow anyone who leaves prison the ability to vote. Because right now it's still confusing. People on probation can vote, people on parole can't vote. And a lot of people don't understand that, especially if they're not really into like politically involved or civically involved. So this will make it a lot easier. So that will be a ballot initiative, and we'll know what happens based on the majority of Californians on how they vote. Thank you.
Thanks, Layla. We have a question about, here we go. I have learned that a person can deliver ballots for others as long as not paid to do so. Is there a network where we could sign up to pick up ballots? And first of all, this is called harvesting, right? And this is totally okay. You want to take this one, Griselda? And then maybe Michael can talk the official.
Yeah, Michael talks to the official, but yes, folks can harvest ballots as long as it's signed, and the mail ballot is sealed, and you could have like a witness signature. And I always have like folks just sign that just in case. But then you could just keep the ballots and drop it off at your local post office. And I mean, that's what we've done in the past, where we do a ballot education night, and if people brought their ballots and they've completed their ballot, they could just leave it with us, and we'll make sure that we get it to the registrar or to the post office. So I don't know if there's any technical stuff there.
Michael?
So let me first start off by really tackling the term ballot harvesting here.
Okay.
For me, I think it comes across as being a kind of a pejorative term. Like there's something wrong with that. There's some ill intent with a person that you are entrusting your ballot to return back to our respective office. There's nothing wrong with a person. It's legal to have a person return your mail ballot back to the Registrar of Voters office. As Griselda indicated, there is a place for the person to sign and give the respective relationship to that individual that they're returning the mail ballot to. Having said that, we've launched into this Vote Safer San Diego campaign, not only to address the pandemic and to really highly encourage people to vote their mail ballot and get it back to our office, as opposed to, and using the polling place as an alternative should you need to use the polling place or demand to vote at a polling place. But the part of the Vote Safer San Diego campaign is to tackle this issue about and the concerns around ballot collection and return. So for us, we knowing that there's that concern that is out there. For us is, look, there are good practices, whether or not you are a mail ballot voter or that you have traditionally gone to a polling place and now you're going to get a mail ballot. Those good practices are clearly marking your ballot, filling in that bubble with ink, signing it on the back of it, sealing the ballot, and then returning it to a trusted source. And who are those trusted sources? Well, for us, the trusted sources is the U.S. Postal Service. There are thousands of blue boxes out there in our county that a person can drop off their prepaid postage envelope that contains that ballot back to and get it back to our office. That is, what are the other trusted sources? Well, that's the Registrar of Voters office and the 124 plus mail ballot drop-off locations that are staffed throughout the entire county. That's going to be running 4 times as long. In the March election, we had 62 mail ballot drop-off locations for 7 days. For this upcoming election, we will have over 124 locations throughout the entire county, staffed by Registrar of Voters staff, running effectively the day after we drop 1.84 million mail ballots through the U.S. Postal Service. So when we do that on October 5th, starting on October 6th, we will have 124 plus locations for a person to drop off their mail ballot. Now, if they don't want to choose any of those, the other trusted location is any one of the 235 super polls that we will have open starting on October 31st and run all the way through November 3rd at 8 p.m. So there are many opportunities to return your mail ballot. And if you find yourself concerned with a person that is trying to collect ballots and return ballots, you just feel skeptical about it, don't do so. There are other avenues, other lifelines for you to directly get that ballot back to our respective office. And if you trust the individual, so be it. That's fine as well. Again, that person is entrusted with that ballot and has legal obligations to get it back to us in a timely fashion without defrauding the system.
And Michael, thank you for that. And when will the locations of the drop-off location, the addresses of the drop-off locations and the polling places be announced? When will they be available for people online?
And so I'm glad you asked that question because they are online as of yesterday. The proposed locations, again, they are not the official or the final locations that are out there, is because we're required to post them for a 10-day public commenting period. Not only just our mail ballot drop-off locations, but our super polls locations that are out there. But as you will see of our mail ballot drop-off locations, every single county library is being used. Every city library within our county is being used. YMCAs are being used. A couple of VFWs, Chamber of Commerce's are being used that are out there. And they're spread around the entire county. So we're really appreciative of all these locations who have been gracious to open up their place to allow us to be there and have our staff there to receive ballots from voters out in the community. And the 235 super polls locations, as I mentioned already, many of those are school. A lot of them are recreation centers. A lot of them are community centers as well. A couple of private locations as well. But like, for example, LGBT, the center in San Diego. We're using that location now because one of those, the executive director there reached out to me and said, hey, we really have been a polling place. We are committed to it. We're going to have this sufficient space. And we made a last minute change to accommodate because voters are aware of that as a polling place, and they can accommodate the social distancing plus the extended period of time that we need the respective location. So my hat is off to everyone that has allowed us to use these respective locations for that duration of time. And I really am appreciative of the county as well as the city library systems that we have out there, because they have been 100% behind us on this.
Well, thank you for getting that information up so soon. We'll be taking a look at that after we break. One last thing, and that is with these webinars, we always like to send our audience off with an action item from our guests. And so I'm going to ask each of you, starting with Layla, what action would you ask of our viewers for when they leave this webinar?
I think one of the fundamental great things about this country is not so much who we vote for, but the fact that we vote. So regardless of your politics, who you think should win, reach 5 to 10 people. And we talked about Griselda up my 5 to 10, so I'm gonna go with 10. 10 people that you know and that might not vote, and you be that leader within that. That's your civic engagement and getting those people to vote. And I think that's a great, and carrying that up to the election day and making sure you hit that number, that's a great way of activating your civic engagement.
Thank you. Griselda.
So I'm still going to keep my 10 people, but reach out. Definitely need to reach out to 10 people that you know, right? Whether it's a text message, let's get together on a Zoom call and go through our ballots, have a ballot party, you know, do whatever you can to encourage 10 people that are non-super voters, right? And also, if you know people that might have children that are turning 18 or are going to turn 18 before the election, help them get registered to vote, and make sure that those folks are registered to vote and ready and prepared. But just get together and be that voice for the people that you know to turn out.
Great, thank you, Griselda. Michael, what are your marching orders for us?
Well, as I've already stated, there's plenty of changes that are happening for this election. But if I was going to make it very concise, the main message here: talk with your friends, family, neighbors, other community organizations that you belong to about what the upcoming election changes that there will be in San Diego County. The fact that every single voter is going to be receiving a mail ballot. The fact that you can still get to a polling place as an assigned polling place on election day, or the 3 days now leading up to election day. That the fact that you have the ability at your disposal to use resource tools that are found on our website about things like where's my ballot, where you can track now your mail ballot as it's going through the U.S. Postal Service to get to you, and then back to, after you voted, getting it back to our office, getting these new services, push notifications, if you will, that is out there. And then also probably the final message: don't take this for granted. It's such an important election, as any election is, whether it's on a national level or on the local level itself. San Diegans have always demonstrated high, robust turnouts. I expect no less in this upcoming election. And certainly we have made it as easy as possible for you to be able to exercise your right to vote. And then lastly, there's a lot, as you've talked about, Elizabeth, there's a lot of misinformation that's circulating around the entire country. And things like social media can be great, and it could also go viral wrong. And so if there are any questions that are out there, please reach out to our office. We receive thousands of calls per day, as well as hundreds of emails, and we're responding to every single one of those to really either debunk or state that something is factually correct. And so use us as a resource to get correct information as you move to cast your mail ballot or get to a polling place come election day or the days leading up to it.
Thank you, Michael. It's time for us to close now. My thanks to our guests, Layla Aziz, Griselda Ramirez, and Michael Vu, for being with us today and providing us with understanding and tools for action. Again, thank you all for joining us. And on behalf of Lead San Diego, I wish you well and don't forget to vote. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.